I'll be talking about keeping your product alive, which is something of a slightly morbid topic for such a beautiful afternoon, but it's something that's quite personal to me. Obviously, I started Intercom, I guess, 5 years ago, and it feels like we've gone through various different phases. And right now, my biggest concern is staying relevant, staying alive. If we was to chart Intercom's success using a random metric, we're not as transparent as Buffer, but here's a metric. Let's call it homepage traffic or something interesting. But I asked our metrics team for some data that shows growth, and this is what they gave me. There's been like 3 eras we've gone through in Intercom. There's been the era where we were trying to basically build the product and effectively have it be born. There's been the time when we had to grow the product, as in get it to a place. And today, I feel like a lot of work is spent on making sure that we can still be relevant and that we can survive as technology keeps moving on. Loosely, I think about this as the times when we were making it work or making it grow or keeping it relevant. And today Intercom is in some sense in good shape. We have over 10,000 customers, tens of millions of dollars in revenue. We've raised $116 million. So you would like to think that we feel pretty comfortable. But the weird sort of reality is that I've never really felt more vulnerable, because I've put I guess 7 of my life or so into making this thing happen, and now I think, well, what if it goes away? Which is scary, because this isn't what I was promised. I was promised that if you crawl through this 100 yard of shit, you'll come out the other side and everything will be okay. But in reality, it feels a lot more like you get out there and you're the next thing you're told is, well, you have to basically get busy living or get busy dying, because you do not get to rest on your laurels in technology. So what's funny is when you look at all the frameworks and all the different advice that gets spat out by all the different companies, and I do include ourselves in this. We've certainly contributed a lot of content on how we think about product and how we think about growing. One thing I've realized is that as you move further along in the trajectory of your company, the advice gets fewer and further between. There's millions and millions of articles about how to get your first 10 customers or how to build your first feature. When you move on, you start to realize that none of this shit matters if you're facing existential threats, right? If literally there's something that could come along and end your company, that certainly starts to concern you. And it turns out McKinsey don't have a chart that's going to save the day. So the things I've sort of realized as we've built Intercom is that every time we deploy, we like to celebrate and think that we've done something innovative. But in reality, once something goes out there, it is effectively history. And a friend of mine phrased this to me as he said, Des, the present is the past. And I was like, okay, are you on drugs or something? And he was like, no, seriously, if it's out there, it's done. And I was like, okay. And he's like, so what that means is your product is actually obsolete. It's already live, it's sitting there, everyone has it. Stop thinking that that's the future. What's the future is the stuff you've yet to ship yet. And I was like, all right. So I was starting to get a bit worried. And then he made the point to me that there's probably already a newer, faster, quicker way to do whatever it is Intercom does for our customers to make progress in their lives. There's already something better out there, and it probably doesn't involve us, which is a really scary thought. So I've been trying to work out, I've talked to people whose businesses have failed, and the way they describe it is that they think they're on solid ground, and then a couple of subtle things change. There's maybe they see an announcement here, a press release there, and then by the time they realize things are going wrong, it's actually too late. And the weird thing is, at the time when the cracks are showing, it's actually asymptomatic. You don't actually feel the ground slipping from under you until it's way too late. And to give you some interesting examples of this, because everyone thinks that you have 5 years to correct yourself once things start going wrong. Here's 2 examples. 2007 was a wonderful year to be a sat-nav company, people who sold satellite navigation tools. So TomTom and Garmin specifically were at their peak. And then this happened. And they've never recovered anything close to where they were, which is fascinating. And this all happened because of one shift in computing. A 52-year-old guy waved a new device around in the Moscone Center, and these guys had hundreds of millions, if not billions, written off their values straight away, effectively straight away. So the realization there is that customers don't sit around waiting while you write up your Jira tickets, right? Yes, I'm sure you can run to the whiteboard and start planning out how you're going to counter, but it doesn't matter. If it's out there, and you're not going to catch up quick enough. It's really, really unlikely. So another simple example of this is the light blue line here represents the fantastic growth of the technology we know and love as SMS. And they were on a great trajectory up until this new unheard of joke technology called messaging came along, specifically a tool called WhatsApp. And in the space of 2 years, 30 engineers totally destroyed the entire SMS telco network, which was actually 90% of how most telcos made profit. So this was a really bad thing for them to happen. But what typically happens here is you find yourself asleep at the cash register. Things are going great, and you feel bulletproof. So you've known, if something new comes along, you're like, oh, it'll probably never work out. Most of them don't. Then eventually, when someone comes out with a press release saying, we have our first 100,000 users, you're like, ah, ha, 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 ha. It's so easy to laugh. And then when they start making traction, that's when you kind of get angry. And then you decide, right, now we're going to fight them. And we're going to have we'll drop our prices, or we'll do something that sort of surely will protect us. But at that point, it's already over and the fight's gone. Now, this isn't to say that SMS is irrelevant, but it's that its growth is gone. And growth is what they actually need to stay alive. Businesses don't survive on stagnation, they survive on growth. So if that story sounds familiar to you, it might remind you of a quote from Gandhi, which I was to say, if I was to express outward rather than the more familiar phrasing, it would go like this. At first, you will ignore them, and then you will laugh at them, then you will fight them, and then they will win. And if you treat your competitors like that, that is, you're basically sowing the seeds for your own destruction. And that is a really, really risky move. And if you want to see a great example of laughing at these things, Steve Ballmer once said, $500 for a phone? It doesn't have a keyboard. It won't be a good email device. Business people won't buy it. It's not going to be useful. And that was his conclusion of the iPhone. And there was, of course, supposed to be audio for that. But what was interesting here was it'd be fine for Ballmer and Microsoft if all that happened here was that Windows Phone died off. Windows Phone wasn't the cornerstone of Microsoft. However, so as a result, mobile didn't kill Windows Phone. Mobile actually killed desktop, right? This is, again, you see the same thing, like the evolution of mobile and growth of Android and iOS has together become the dominant platform. It's really easy to look at technology and see that think that everything has to be one big epic tidal wave that blitzes everything else out. But I think, to quote somebody from Microsoft, Steve Sinofsky, I think it's better to think of technology as an ecosystem of sort of interacting cogs or plates that sort of spin on top of each other. And what I take from that is that just because somebody invents a small feature that isn't your core, that does not mean that your core is not at risk. You are not likely to be replaced by something that looks exactly like you. In fact, it's most likely something that doesn't look too much like you, but it has some small thing that lets customers make progress without you. So, going back to Intercom for a second, the thing I say a lot internally is that we didn't come this far to only come this far. So how do we keep going? How do we make sure that the journey continues, that the story goes on? And a lot of it for me comes back to this question I constantly ask. Whenever I see anything new, whether it's a new competitor or a new technology or a new release or some weird thing gets voted #1 on Product Hunt or whatever, and the first question I encourage people to ask is some version of, does this new technology make it cheaper, faster, or easier for our customers to make progress in their lives? If it does, it's going to have a relevant impact on us eventually. The other piece of this is that everyone thinks cheaper means cost. The price is probably the smallest part that your product charges. Your product charges time, focus, training, and yeah, there's a $sign price tag on it, but that's rarely the defining issue. So, to stay ahead of your industry, the thing I'm forever encouraging people to do is observe, practice along this, what's called an OODA loop, which is military terminology, but basically what it means is As you get more knowledge, can you observe it, orient yourself around it, make a decision, and act on it? If you can, you're always going to be able to defend yourself. You might still lose, but you will not be caught blindsided. If you can't, you will definitely be blindsided. To give an example of what this OODA loop means, right? If here on the left is your ability to ship software yourself, and on the right is the speed at which your industry moves, what you'll find is you can adopt every new technology that the industry spits out as it comes along. And that's a great place to be. You don't have to, but you have the option to react whenever you need to. But if this arrow changes direction, it's game over. When your industry is moving faster than you are, and this will happen if you're a huge enterprise corp, everything will come out. And then like years later, you get to announce, and we're finally today have a cloud edition. And you'll see this when big, like the larger companies boast about stuff that's like barely still relevant. I consider like walking backwards into the future. You're moving into the future, but you're still looking at the past. You're talking about like email and keyboards in a time of touchscreen and messaging or whatever. It's like you're only seeing the future through the lens of what your history was, and it's a bad place to be. So it's 2016, 2017. What are the things that are going to like probably change and have impacts on your products? One of them is the consolidation of the enterprise. So we used to build solutions on desktops, and then the cloud came along. And what happened when the cloud came along is we had this idea of let's split everything we do into microscopic tools. Let's go from an entire bookkeeping package to an invoice tool, a payments tool, a time tracking tool, and maybe an expenses tool. And all of these were different tools. And the dream of the Web 2.0 was that these would all beautifully interface together and it would be fantastic. That dream didn't come to pass. So we ended up with a shitload of different tools. And this is one of the problems that we tried to solve with Intercom. And it's interesting how, like, the way we express the problem, the way my CEO once drew it on a whiteboard is, there's all these different things in the world, and they don't all talk to each other, but they should. And we're going to build the thing that lets them all talk to each other easily. We're going to build a single place, a consolidated place for this. So we put this diagram live on our marketing site. And we were very happy with ourselves. We thought it was a nice piece of work. And then a curious thing happened. Slowly, we started to see this diagram elsewhere. It didn't stop either. It just kept coming. And we're like, okay. And you can see it got a little bit wackier along the way as people took their own interpretation of things. But it just kept going. It was just relentless. Every single place we went, we could see this diagram. I still see it at least once a day. So, like, clearly there's something going on here. Like, clearly this is a problem people experience, and it's a trend that's happening. Point tools are being replaced by things that are consolidated around workflows, not around single things, not around isolated stores of information. So, a question you should ask yourself for your product is, would consolidating the adjacent tools make it cheaper, easier, or faster for customers to make progress in their lives? And related to that is, like, is it easier to use a consolidated tool that maybe doesn't have absolutely everything you need, but lets you have seamless workflows? Or is specificity what your customers care about? Are there adjacent workflows that you should sort of consider? Do your customers is your expectation that your customers have to jump from tool to tool just to get their job done, and you want to be just one of those tools? Well, if it is, they don't like it, and they will look at somebody who's going to offer them an alternative. Another trend that's happening right now, or at least not happening, but like it's certainly hit a lot of popularity lately, is artificial intelligence. So our industry loves two things. We love the hype of artificial intelligence, and then we love to mock artificial intelligence. So a while ago, I posted this tweet where I said, I think most AI tools are basically just a shitload of if-then-else statements chained together to make them look smart. And it was a very popular tweet. But, AI has gotten interesting. There are now artificial intelligent robots that can do fantastically complex tasks. Like I saw this one recently that can, for example, put lipstick on a woman while she's getting ready, which is particularly smart, I think. We'll see how this one works. So it's smart. It works. It can also wake you up in the morning as well, which I think is pretty smart. And my favorite part, right after it wakes you up, it can make your cereal as well, which is obviously very, very, very useful as well. My favorite bit is the milk. But, like, joking aside, there has been some interesting shifts in AI. For example, I think it was Audi who released this video where they just made the point, like, they released this video of a car clearly identifying a pedestrian, stopping and showing a walkway for the pedestrian, and it fades out and it says, is this a concept video? And it's daring you to ask that question because you start to realize that all this stuff actually exists. Certainly within all of our lifetimes, we're going to see driverless cars. They are going to happen. They won't be as good as the best driver on earth, but they'll be much better than the average. And that's the key realization for AI. It doesn't need to be better than the best. It just needs to be better than the average. So, the other sacred cow of AI, of course, is Go, the board game Go, which apparently we were never going to beat. Well, AI beat the best player at Go this year. So even the sacred cows of what's deemed to be like human logic and intuition and sort of recursive depth are being killed. So a sort of realization there is that if a task can be expressed to a machine as inputs and outputs and desired outputs, the machine will get near perfect immediately because computers can learn in seconds what takes us our entire lifetime. They can read a library in the time I'm saying this sentence. That is the capability computers have. And the common sort of refrain is like, oh, who's going to like teach them? And I'm like, we're going to teach them. We're not deliberately going to teach them, but by interacting with computers every day, we teach them. We show them what we do. We show them what we like. We show them how we search. And when you realize that, you start to realize that for many tasks, we're going to learn that like good enough immediately for free is actually better than employing a human. So questions you should ask yourself is like, does artificial intelligence, or at least the ability for a machine to learn, make it cheaper, faster, or easier for customers to make progress in their lives? And if it does, you need to think about how you're going to react to it. Specifically, does your product have a set of data that a machine could learn from? And can you observe how your users currently behave and then imitate their behavior so that they don't have to do that task anymore? And that task can be anything. It could be painting in Photoshop, or it could be sorting files or filing expenses. But you do realize humans teach computers all the time. Another trend that's very popular at the moment is messaging and bots. So bots specifically are popular because they're at the intersection of two megatrends, messaging and AI itself. And what's happening here, in my opinion, is that the internet is actually being rebuilt around people. We used to build it around pages and destinations, but now we're building it around people, around us. And what's interesting here is that like people want to feel a part of something. They want to feel connected. And more than that, like what we've seen is that like for the guts of like the last 40 years or so, anyone who could program has been trying to make people connect through computers in lots of different ways. And this goes all the way back. In 1973, Talk-to-Matic was one of the first ways people could connect. In 80 or 81, we saw a CB simulator, which is another way people could connect. Today, messaging apps have just blown up. These are the top 10 messaging apps in the world. Even the shit ones are growing, That's how popular messaging is. And in fact, Mark Zuckerberg said recently that like, literally messaging is the only thing people do more than social networking. That's how popular it is. It's literally the only thing people do more, which is why he drops 18 bill on WhatsApp, right? It's this whole idea. This is why Snapchat is valued at 16 billion or whatever. Here, every single icon here is a messaging app, right? Everyone's chasing this. And it's incredible to see this growth. But the way I think about it is like, if everyone is in messaging, then product makers need to get into conversations. They need to be a part of those conversations. And what that looks like is like the product is now going to sit in a chat. So if me and you were talking about a pizza, the pizza product needs to be a part of that conversation. It's no longer going to be a destination that we have to go over to order pizza. It's going to be a part of the conversation. So Chris Messina calls this trend conversational commerce, the idea that you can talk and also participate in commerce at the same time, much like you would when you go shopping with somebody. The question you should ask yourself here is like, would a simple messaging UI make it cheaper, faster, or easier for customers to make progress in their lives? And the related questions are things like, is use of your product triggered by a conversation taking place somewhere else? And if so, maybe that's where you should be. There's an interesting thing going on here. The designers amongst you have probably asked yourself this. Why is this so popular, right? In like the 80s, we had command line interfaces where we could do things like this, and we could order, say, cinema tickets or something like that. And we think this is old school. What's weird today is that if we do the exact same thing in text messaging, for some reason, like it's literally the exact same stuff going on here, but people see this and like they literally shit their pants, right? Which is bizarre. So what's happening is this is the command line for normal humans. It's no longer weird, archaic Unix commands. It's normal people commands. But why are commands better? Isn't this just a failure of UI? Like, isn't this just Monkey Island all over again, where we give people specific commands and ask them to enter them? What's happening is that the amount of work required to actually do these things is not the relevant metric. Here, you could argue it takes 73 taps to order a pizza, and over here, to use a normal pizza UI, it might only take you 16 taps. But it's not the point, because you can only do those 16 taps if, and only if, you actually know the interface. But not every interface is worth learning. When you're designing a product, you can use a UI that everyone understands, which is messaging, or you can go and design a whole new UI for them to learn. And sometimes you have to ask yourself, would a familiar UI make it cheaper, faster, easier for our customers to make progress? And the answer is quite often it'll make it cheaper, because they don't have to learn anything anymore. They just need to write out what they want. So are customers using your UI or website navigation for no reason? Will you customers see any value in knowing how to use your product or navigate your website? One thing I should call out here is that there's a difference between using software to sell your product and selling software that is your product. So that speaks to what customers want to learn. Similarly, there's a difference between using software, customers using software like to buy their product, and a customer buying software to like buy a pizza, right? Sometimes you're paying for the software, sometimes you're paying for the pizza. And there's a difference in terms of what you want to know and what you want to learn, right? And the last piece I just want to talk about is products to systems. Your product is no longer a set of screens, and your product is no longer a set of workflows or journeys or screenshots or anything people want to share on Dribbble. These are all the old ways of building software. Your product is now a system. Facebook is a system. People have stories on Facebook, and stories appear in one of three places. Simple. That's all of what Facebook is. It sounds more complicated, but that's all Facebook is. Instagram is a system. People take a photo, apply a filter, and throw it into a stream. People can comment and like on those photos. It's a system. So how, when, where your users interact with your product is always going to change, from watches to touch to mobile to audio to voice inputs. That's all going to change, guaranteed. It's the only thing that's guaranteed here is change. That's why it's dangerous to think that you're building screenshots that are going to be your product. It's not. Your product is the system that controls all this, and the screenshots are just one way to interact. If you're doing your job right, some of your customers may never log into your product. They might just use the system. If we considered Intercom to just be like something that you can email with and in-app with, it'd be a problem. When someone like Zuckerberg comes along and says, "Hey, I'm going to launch a new way for messages and to message businesses," but because we think of Intercom as much more like a system that things just go through, it's not a problem. It's just another way that things work. So some of our best customers don't even log into the thing that we spend all day designing, but that's okay. That has to be okay. It's a system. Quartz, the news app that is actually now news by a bot, that's doable because they have a system. It's not a set of designs, it's a system. So the last thing I'll leave you with is just making all your products usable through all inputs and outputs. Will that make it easier, faster, more accessible to use in more places? If so, yes, you should consider going that way. People are calling this at the moment the post-app world, and I think that's a good thing. I think we need to get out of this mindset that you have to actually be like building apps only. You're creating systems that solve problems for people. Those systems have actions and models, and that's literally the new world of software. So, to wrap up, I'll just say this. As product owners, as founders, as designers, we have an obligation, obviously, to gel engineering and design and get the products out the door and make sure that they earn money and that they work well. But we have this other obligation, which is we have to observe what's happening in the outside world and make sure that our product is always relevant in it. Thank you very much.